Hi, I'm Marc Balcer. You know, this guy. I want to provide you with an introduction to our product TAME, that's Test Automation Made Easy, and show you how we're using executable and translatable models for software testing. Now here's a question for you. On a scale of 1 awful to 5 great, how would you rate your software testing? See, motivated by our clients' moves into agile incremental development with automated continuous testing, we developed TAME as a system for creating and managing those software tests. Now, while there are many commercial and open source products out there to help you run tests, frameworks like Selenium and Appium, none really address the problem of actually creating those tests. In fact, as we like to say, agile methods and continuous testing have created a sort of hungry beast that needs to be fed with lots of test cases. So, how challenging is it for you to create your software tests? Let me first show you the basics of how TAME works. I'll start with something small and simple, in this case a login page. Here we see 2 inputs, the user ID and the password. Now, the login itself is triggered by the event of clicking the blue login button. A TAME workbook is just a spreadsheet. I'll enter my 2 inputs, user ID and password, and the triggering event. Now, because the test also depends upon some pre-existing environment conditions, I'll also define these. Now, I'll partition each of the inputs and conditions into different choices, each of which will lead to different outcomes. For example, a successful login requires a user ID that's a good email address that names a real user, plus a non-blank password that's correct for that user. Now, marking these 5 rows defines what's required for a successful login. Other results may only require some of the choices. For example, if the user ID is missing, then it doesn't matter what we enter for the password. We expect to see this particular error. Now, filling out this single table, well, that's in contrast to writing test cases one at a time, what I often call serial testing. Now, once you have your inputs, your conditions, and your results, you can use TAME to generate a whole suite of scenarios. And just like that, we've got our scenarios. But real test cases require real values. We specify values over here on the right. Gary, a good user ID in the form of an email address that names a real user. Charlie, a good email address that doesn't name a real user. A special keyword for blank, and others. Because I'm using a spreadsheet to make up this table, I could also use formulas to compute values, such as 4 days ago or a random number within a range. I could even compute expected results, and by doing that, I'm using TAME to create a so-called test oracle. Now, to make an even more readable script for reviewing and manual testing, I can also go in and add Excel cell comments like these. Now I can generate my tests, and you see the required preconditions, the actual values to use, and detailed directions for each step. These weren't written one by one, but rather were generated from this one single table. Now, how extensively do you use unit tests like these? Next, let's combine this one page into a larger sequence. I'll start by opening the browser to the home page, clicking the login link, doing the login, seeing that I got to the logged in home page, and then logging out. To model this in TAME, I just create one tab for each of the different pages or states. Now the logged out home page is simple. It's just the event of clicking the login link. In TAME, when I make a result that matches the name of another tab or page, that indicates a transition to that new page. Likewise, a successful login, the event of clicking the button with the good inputs, that'll take me to the logged in homepage. Then, clicking the log out link, that'll take me back to the logged out homepage. When I put this through TAME, I get a set of scenarios that not only cover all the different cases of the login page, but integrate those into a full coverage of the login sequence. Now, I gave you a hint earlier. What does this sequencing scheme remind you of? I hope you said a state model. See, the idea of joining tabs to form sequences originated as a way to start with unit tests and to work up to whole use cases or user activities. It didn't take very much to see that what we really had in each TAME workbook was a classic state model. Now, while I'm on the subject of state models, let's have some fun. Here's a state model example you probably already know. Here's the 1-minute microwaver from modeling the world in states. Now, for testing purposes, I'll overlay the actions with what I expect to be true once the oven's in each state. See how in my TAME workbook each state is its own tab? The events are down the side, the transitions are specified as expected results, and they're all marked with an X. Each state also has checks for the things that should be true once we get into that state. Want a state transition diagram? Here you go. We'll be adding the ability to create workbooks from diagrams in TAME version 8. So how many scenarios? Well, TAME thinks there are 4. It generates scenarios such that each does as much as possible without duplicating a path, but the set of scenarios cover every state and every transition. But we're really after automated test execution. Now, if you're doing automated testing, what tools and systems are you currently using? In practice, there are many different kinds of test automation. With TAME, you can generate unit tests in a programming language. Just supply an XSLT template, and we'll generate unit tests directly into your IDE. The TAME workbook is a model, and TAME effectively compiles that model. Now, UI automations, that's tests that simulate user behavior. Well, UI automation's a much bigger challenge. Selenium's a popular technology for automating web browsers. Often developers will take the test plans and then code automation tests in languages like Java, C#, Ruby, and such. But we know better. These test plans are models, and we can compile those models. Of course, I really want to build executable tests without having to write really in any programming language. Because see, one of the big obstacles to the adoption of test automation is the desire to have non-programmer manual testers do automation testing. Now, while solving that problem, that's well beyond the scope of this talk, I'll show you how TAME approaches UI automation. When I hit the Run tab button, I get a worksheet on which I can enter the individual instructions for each precondition, input, and result check. Now, many test cases will do similar things. This will let us specify a single archetype for type something into the field and have it applied across many test cases. To get the actual instructions for Selenium, we can just go ahead and use a browser plugin like Selenium IDE that lets us record our actions. Now, once I have these added in, I hit the button and I'm off. Now, TAME also provides mechanisms that are needed in most automation frameworks, such as progress monitoring, logging, timing, and making screen captures. By providing these capabilities, the tester is able to focus on the features to be tested instead of on the mechanics of test automation. Now, at its heart, TAME builds tests by forming combinations of inputs, states, and transitions. But it's not limited to unit tests and UI flows. We've also used TAME to create test data from bits and pieces of an information model. Automated test execution tackles the problems that are inherent in boring, repetitive, and error-prone manual testing. See, running tests by hand is expensive and it's slow. But writing comprehensive test suites can also be expensive and slow. Now, as model-driven people, we know how to deal with these kinds of boring, repetitive, and error-prone processes. Our solution is TAME. That's a tool for modeling systems and for automating the creation and the execution of their test suites. Thank you very much for your time and attention. If you want to learn more, contact me or go to tame.dev.